Hey everybody, this is Bo Sanders. I'm here at the Loft, and we just wrapped up earlier this week the end of our Faith Basics Summer Series, and as promised, I wanted to do a 10-minute recap video. We ended with a bang, talking about end times and life after death. So, put 10 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to try and recap it. It seems impossible. I'm going to try and recap it in 10 minutes. Go. So we started in Revelation, as all good talks about the end do. You start at the end of the Bible with this amazing book written in this odd kind of apocalyptic, poetic craziness, and people don't know what to do with it. I love the book of Revelation. I didn't at first. When I first became a Christian, I did not like it very much because I was under the impression it was about the end of the world. But the more I studied it, and the more I looked into early church's interpretation and rabbinical kind of use of numbers and poetry and imagery, I started to really embrace it, and then I loved it a little too much, and I got a little too into end time stuff, and I ended up popping out. I pressed so hard into it that I popped out on the other side, and now I'm back to loving it. I think that it is such an amazing book once you understand that it is not about the 21st century and it is not about the end of the world. That it is a political critique of what was going on in those first 2 centuries in the Roman Empire. But what we did is we started in Revelation and we read it literally. And this is a really fun exercise. A lot of people say they read the Bible literally, but they don't. No one does. And that's fine, because you're not supposed to. But a lot of us were taught that we were supposed to say that we read the Bible literally. And how you know that this is not exactly true is because when you get to passages where you have these weird images, this kind of epic stuff, like you have 7 crowns on the 7 heads of a dragon that comes up from the sea, and somebody will be like, that's Babylon, that's Iraq. Or somebody will go, no, it's Russia, right? Or whatever it is. But they're assigning meaning to it because they're not reading it literally. They know that a dragon with 7 heads doesn't come up from the sea. We're all interpreting. We're doing something with the text. Now, we can have a vibrant conversation about what to do with the text, but once you are free of the idea that you're reading it literally, A, or B, that it's about the end of the world, you can really start to see the beauty of this genre of literature called apocalyptic, and how it addresses, because when you are part of an oppressed people, when you are an occupied person, you have to write kind of in code. And we don't have anything like this in our culture for obvious reasons, but it does exist. But because it's such a foreign genre to us, apocalyptic, we don't know what to do with it, so we just read it like we read anything else, like a newspaper article. We just read the book of Revelation and we go, oh, it's going to happen like this. And we draw wall charts and we have diagrams and timelines, and we try and do this predictive thing. So once you're free of that, it becomes a really fun exercise to try and read the book literally. And here's what we found the other day. So you have the Great White Throne Judgment. This is Revelation 20 and 21 as you read this. And then you have all of these locations show up. You have the death, you have the sea, you have Hades, and then you can see there's like different holding pens and different things happen there, and then they're emptied out. Everything comes before the Great White Throne, and then some people get thrown into the lake of fire, and some people go on to be with God in eternity or rest in bliss, whatever you want to call that, because all of these different stories have different names for all of these locations. And I think the important thing is that some people take it too literally, and they ruin it for the rest of us. Because what happens is that other people are like, look, I don't believe any of that, and they just walk away from it. And it's that binary of, is it true or is it fiction, or however we want to say it, that we get caught up in, and we either say we're for something or against something. I think we have to get away from that entirely. And we need to say, what is it about the author who wrote this? What was this author asking for in the reader? Why did the early communities resonate with that? Why did it give them hope? What did it call out of them? What role did it play? How did it function in the early churches? And once we understand that the text is functioning, or that it is calling for a response, it's asking us for something, or it's giving to us a gift, of strength, of resistance, to not bow down to false idols, to not compromise to the occupying force, to not cave in under the weight of the oppression. You see this in the book of Daniel as well, that this genre of literature plays a definite role. It functions. So when you read it literally, you start seeing some really cool stuff. The author of Revelation has a bunch of books that contain everyone's deeds or works, and then there's another book called the Book of Life. And if anybody's name was found written in the book, they get to go to the good place. But if anybody's name was not in the Book of Life, they were judged according to what was written in the book about their deeds, and they went to the bad place. Here's why that's pretty cool. That means that no matter what you do in all your works cannot get you to be in the presence of God or into the good place or heaven or rest or paradise. That only knowing God, that God knows your name, that's how you get in. And if that's not true of you, none of your works, none of your deeds can qualify you for that, right? But here's the problem. Then you go to Matthew 24:25, and you listen to what Jesus says about the sheep and the goats, and you run into a little problem because Jesus apparently doesn't know about the books, and he says that everyone will be judged according to their works, not their name written in the book of life, but according to their works, and that's how we're going to separate the sheep and the goats into the good place and the not good place. So that's a little weird. And then you jump over to like Luke 16, and you have the story that Jesus tells, like this parable about this poor guy, Lazarus, and he's with Abraham in heaven or paradise or somewhere, Abraham's bosom. But he can actually have a conversation with this rich guy who's being tormented in the lake of fire. And they're actually conversing back and forth. So apparently they're in close enough proximity to each other that they can have a conversation across this chasm. So once you start being a literalist, then you have to start doing things like, well, wait a minute, is this place this, is this? And then you start diagramming and you mash names together. And it's actually really a fun exercise. And you see how complicated it can be to try and read the Bible that way. So one of the things we do is when we ask, like, why do you think this is about Russia, right? And then people start talking about genre. Apocalyptic is a genre. You start talking about poetics, that there's a vision, an allegory. There's something going on in the way that language is being used that's not like a newspaper. And then the last thing is, how do you interpret it? And that's a really vibrant conversation that even people who see religion very differently, that see Christianity differently, that take the Bible very differently, can have a really vibrant, lively conversation about what we do with the text and what it's asking from us. The one thing that I don't want to do is to say, because those people read it in a way that I don't agree with, I'm going to abandon the project altogether and not even engage the text at all. And I think that either or binary dualism that we've bought into in our modern age is killing us. And we have to get away from it. So, a lot of people ask the big question like, wait a minute, if the book of Revelation isn't about the end, then what do we think about the end? Because Christianity should probably have some ultimate goal or idea. Otherwise, why would people work for a preferable world if they, like, what's the goal here? If this doesn't outline how the world kind of comes to an end or what the end goal is, what do you replace it with? So I've actually tried to mock up, since Revelation is not about the end of the world, I've tried to mock up a different eschatology, which is called like the study of the end or your theory of that. So I'm going to do it in 60 seconds. I'm going to try. So I believe that we can compromise with, even if people who like talking about the end times or whatever, that we can acknowledge that something happened both in our culture and in our world between 1968 and 1973 that changed how we live and is currently changing society in our interconnected, globalized world. That the Woodstock era came to an end, the assassination of JFK and Martin Luther King. We saw Earth from space for the first time in that little blue marble, just on and on. Something shifted in our culture. The age of Aquarius, you can call it, but something changed in the stars, in our culture, and we entered into a new era. So whether you call that a new age or the end times, whatever it is, let's just acknowledge that something definitely changed in that era. but Jesus didn't come back. And I think that the longer we live, and I get this from Mark C. Taylor in the book Theology at the End of Modernity, the longer we go in this new age without acknowledging that we entered into the new age, but Jesus didn't come back, the longer that is delayed, the more our society is going to react with what I've labeled the 4 Ds: discouragement, dysfunction, decline, and disaster. So in discouragement, you just see this malaise, this perpetual boredom. It results in consumerism, retail therapy. We work these endless 9-to-5 jobs that are unsatisfying, and there is a collective resignation that this is just the way things are, and there's not much we can do with it. What are you going to do? You're just one person. That's discouragement. Dysfunction. From our divorce rates to our gridlocked government, there is a pervasive dysfunction. Things aren't working the same anymore, including our economy. You have decline. From our educational standards to our church attendance to American exceptionalism in the international community, there is a decline across the board of the things we used to measure success by. And last, you have disaster. Environmental, from the oil spills to the melting of the ice caps. You have the economy, you have the crash and the bailout of the too big to fail banks, and you have these 2 wars in the Middle East that we cannot end. And so there's discouragement, dysfunction, decline, and disaster. And that will continue to escalate the longer we live in this new age that we entered into, and Jesus doesn't come back. These will be the things by which we mark that era. So that's an eschatology that's interesting. I think it's a conversation worth having. If we're not going to talk about the book of Revelation, we can talk about this, and I want to see where that goes. I'm going to close with a quote from Mark C. Taylor, who I mentioned, and then next time we'll do life after death. So here's the quote by Mark C. Taylor. "The end is approaching, has always been approaching from the beginning. Still it seems closer today than ever before. We are on the edge of disaster, under its threat. The threat is real, and we delude ourselves by trying to deny or repress it. Can disaster be delayed? Will it be deferred? We cannot be sure. If there is hope, then it lies not in certainty, but in uncertainty, not in security, but in insecurity, not in foundations, but in their faults, not in cures, but in wounds. That wound might be our hope. Small hope, fragile hope. Nothing more, nothing more, nothingness, impermanence, the world's continual breathing." The end. Let me know your thoughts, your comments, your concerns, and we'll address them going forward. I hope you have enjoyed this. Thanks for staying tuned, and I'm really enjoying this series, so we'll keep it going.